Today we're going to dive into Hedera Hashgraph. Now, of course, many of you guys probably know this project as HBAR. That's the token that you probably invest in, and you're understanding and looking at maybe new ideas of what they're doing. And research is really what we're all about here. So today we're going to dive a little deeper. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back to TechPath. Let's get into it today with Mr. Mance Harmon, who is the CEO and co-founder over at Hedera Hashgraph. Great to have you on the show, Mance.
Thank you. Great. It's good to be back.
All right, so Mance, we had a chance to talk last year and really kind of explored Hedera as a whole. I think for some of our audience, it might have been the first time they had been introduced to the project. Could you give us kind of an update of where Hedera is today on 2022?
Sure. Well, I think it's been some time since we spoke last. There's a lot that has happened. We've taken multiple significant steps starting last year with the creation of a foundation. So we have the HBAR Foundation that is now operational, has its own team, totally independent of Hedera, and is now off and running. They're chartered to help build the ecosystem, and half of my team, roughly, that's not quite true, but the business development team of the Hedera Hashgraph network has moved over to the foundation. They're now part of the foundation, and it's off operational on its own. In addition to that, just last week, we announced that we're going to open source the software,
right,
which is a big deal for us. We've been proprietary, or at least the Hashgraph portion of the platform has been proprietary from the beginning for some really good reasons. Happy to talk about those. But we've decided at this point in time, it's actually to the benefit of the project and the Hedera ecosystem at large if we go ahead and open source, which we're doing. And then finally, we are going to decentralize the operations of the LLC further, and that we're moving a large part of the organization from Hedera into Swirlds, which was the original member of Hedera, the parent, if you will, of Hedera. And then all of the operations of Hedera, by and large, are going to be managed by the member organizations, including Swirlds. So a lot going on, and happy to talk about any of that or other things as well.
So Dr. Baird, you know, the CTO, founder of Swirlds, and that kind of connection. So it's interesting. Talk to me about how this decentralized organization will operate. So you're saying some of the team has moved into the HBAR Foundation. What is going to be their function? What's their primary goal?
So if you look at the different business units within Hedera, it's what you would kind of expect. You know, there's marketing, there's engineering, there's product, finance, legal, HR, etc. And then a big portion of that is council operations as well, because we have the council.
Right.
Today we're 25 strong and continue to grow. The engineering, the marketing, the product management, and most of the back office functions, legal, finance, HR. While some of legal and finance are going to stay with the LLC, the rest will then, all of that function will move back into Swirlds. And then Swirlds will continue to provide the services that this team currently does, but alongside other council members and community members that can contribute as well. So what will be left, to be clear, in the LLC, in Hedera, is council operations, and the council today is governing. That's one of the reasons that we've taken the step to go ahead and decentralize the rest of operations. The council is functional today, and it's doing a great job. You know, it manages the network, it manages treasury and product roadmap and legal and regulatory matters quite well. It's been doing a great job. And so governance has been decentralized for some time.
Yeah.
And now we're just taking the final steps to decentralize operations.
Very nice. All right, so for some of our viewers and listeners, because we do this both on audio podcast as well as the video here on YouTube, let's talk about the Hashgraph technology, because I think people understanding how this works and the differentiation that Hedera brings to the blockchain industry is very unique. Can you explain, to our audience what makes Hedera so special?
Yeah, well, there are two things. We just touched on one of those, and that is the governance model. I think the governance model is as important as the tech at maturity. As the market continues to mature, an increasing importance the market will place on how the network is governed. And I think we have best in class in that regard. But on the tech is also a next generation, a far leap beyond traditional proof of work blockchain technology. So blockchain operates in a very linear fashion, meaning that all the nodes in the network, the miners, if you will, they collect all of the transactions that are flowing into the network. They put them into blocks, and then they compete with one another for the opportunity to take their block and put it on top of the blockchain, the chain of blocks of transactions. And that process takes an enormous amount of energy and is very slow. It's designed to be slow, believe it or not. It takes time for the community to come to agreement on which block should go on top of the blockchain. And so it's inefficient. Hashgraph, on the other hand, works very differently. All the transactions flow to all the nodes in the network. And as those transactions flow in, they kind of just sort of pile up on one another, to put it in a very loose layman terms. And the nodes in the network are able to collect all of these transactions into the local copy of their data structure, which is a hash graph. It's a formal mathematical structure that contains all of these transactions, similar to how blockchain contains all the transactions in a chain. Hashgraph contains all the transactions, but in a graph, and it does so in parallel. And there's no need to slow anything down. The nodes, as the transactions flow in, the nodes operate in such a way that they can look at that graph and come to an agreement on the order of the transactions within the graph. And this is all being done in parallel. What that means, practically speaking, is that the energy consumption is tiny by comparison. In fact, University College London published a report showing that Hashgraph and the Hedera network uses the least amount of energy of any of the major layer ones. And then in addition, it's incredibly fast. When you think about Bitcoin or Ethereum today, they can process 7 or 15 transactions per second globally within their networks.
Right.
Our beta version of our network today has capacity already for 10,000 transactions per second. We expect that to go up by many factors, and then we scale beyond that through sharding, adding other networks that communicate with ours. And so it's just the difference between a calculator and a computer in terms of performance. And because it's Hashgraph and the way it's built, it also achieves the theoretical limits in terms of what can be achieved when it comes to security. It's something called asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance, or ABFT, and it's unique in the industry in the way that it works. Hashgraph is. So it's got a lot of technical properties that just make it superior to what else is out there. That, combined with the governance model, give us the value proposition that I think is what's driving the adoption of the network today. And by the way, when I talk about that, what I mean is, if you look at the number of transactions that we've processed, in December, we crossed over the 2 billion threshold. So we've processed more than 2 billion transactions since the network started in September of 2019. That's the most in the industry, period, bar none.
Right.
So Yeah, we're proud of the tech and proud of the value that we bring to the market.
Sure. Mance, so understanding the technology superiority and kind of the application use cases that we're starting to see develop in the industries around us right now. Blockchain is being utilized in a lot of different places. Obviously, we've seen the explosion of NFTs and those use cases beyond just what we're seeing in the gaming world and things of that nature. NFTs are going to be used for a lot more things. In real-world applications for Hedera, where do you see the biggest opportunity for real blockchain use case and adoption, whether it's business, engineering, technology, and science? Where would Hedera potentially really find its niche?
Yeah. Well, when you look at our council members, we intentionally have added council members that span industries, right? They're not all just a bunch of banks or tech giants or from
Right.
any single industry. They span the industries. And each of those categories, those members are focused on in various areas. So DLA Piper is a global law firm. They have Toko, which is a token issuance platform built on top of Hedera, and they're in the business of tokenizing assets and various assets, real estate, debt instruments, assets generally. That's interesting because it's sort of in line with what the rest of the market is doing in terms of tokenization. But then you take another organization, totally different industry, ServiceNow, $130 billion company, and they are providing digital workflows to 1,000 of the largest companies in the world, and they're part of the council, and they have already demonstrated a proof of concept where they've integrated support for service level agreements, the management of service level agreements with Hedera, and have announced that they're taking that next step now to integrate support for the platform by taking our services and integrating them into their primary products, the Now platform, that will make it easier for their customer base to build and go to market with their own distributed ledger applications. And of course we have the banks that are involved as well. Shinhan Bank out of Korea and Standard Bank out of South Africa have done extended POCs for the transfer of value from one jurisdiction to another using stable coins. Standard Bank has talked about tokenization of debt instruments. So, it's all over the board. If we look at what is the council as a whole kind of interested in generally, I would say the ESG related applications, the tokenization of carbon credits and RECs and offsets, and the creation of marketplaces that allow for the trading of those assets. That's of interest to the council generally. But I wouldn't say that there's one particular area that has sort of dominated the rest at this point.
Right. Okay, so with this decentralized governance model that you've got, an evolving model working from the original governed by 25 companies, including Google, IBM, LG, Dutch Telecom, they were kind of referring to this as third generation public ledger. How does that, or is that affected in the new governance model?
Well, when we designed the governance model from the beginning, we intended for it to be the most decentralized governance model of any of the layer one platforms, of any in our peer category. And when we talk about that, you have to think about definitions. What do we mean when we say decentralized? And when in the form of governance, what we mean specifically is that each council member has one vote, and they are making decisions on things that matter to the ecosystem at large and function of the network. So treasury management, product roadmap, legal and regulatory posture, and that sort of thing. When you compare that governance model to some of the other platforms, we believe that we are the most decentralized. It's not a single foundation that is making those decisions. It's not half a dozen core developers that are making those types of decisions. It's decentralized from the beginning, in that we now have 25 and we're growing to 39, and we keep that weighting across the council members in a decentralized way, on par with one another. Alternatively, you could think about the ordering of transactions. Are you decentralized in governance? Are you decentralized in the ordering of transactions? Again, when we have the council members all running the nodes, their weight on the order of the transactions flowing into the network is on par with one another. So you have 25 nodes that are putting transactions in order. You compare that to, say, Bitcoin. Bitcoin today has half a dozen or fewer mining companies that pretty much control the more than 50% of the hashing power of the Bitcoin network. Well, I would argue that we're more decentralized in the ordering of transactions than Bitcoin. Same thing is true, generally speaking, for Ethereum. So you have to specifically define your terms. And we're talking about in governance and in the ordering of transactions, we are by design meant to be the most decentralized of any of the platforms.
Mance, so a lot of this evolution for what Hedera is trying to achieve and really kind of move into this space, going in this direction with, not only decentralization, but also the ability to really kind of cross into a variety of different industries for use case scenarios for blockchain. Because I think a lot of people, when they look at blockchain in general, they get caught up with Bitcoin, Ethereum. Mostly it's an investor that's looking at it. But what's really happening here is the underlying tech for Web3 is being created literally right before our very eyes. So all these companies are all initially, the tokens do their work, for investment and for, the funding mechanism, those kind of things. But when you look at the underlying tech, lots of things are happening right now, especially last year, and I think this year could be some breakthrough achievements. When you look at that, what are some things that you guys are doing from Hedera's standpoint of really trying to break through that adoption curve that we need to be able to accelerate blockchain tech?
Yeah. Well, you're right. I think there is a confluence of different pieces of infrastructure that are going to enable real enterprise use cases in a way that hasn't been there before. And let's just talk about those individually for a moment. If you combine tokenization generally with, let's say, stable coins and maybe DeFi, and then a standard often talked about use case for distributed ledger technology, that being supply chain. Let's just take supply chain, for example. With the combination of those technologies, what you can have is a supply chain system where, as the widgets flow into the supply chain, let's call them sneakers, tennis shoes, flow into the supply chain, those tennis shoes now individually get represented by a token, an NFT perhaps, and the information that is associated with those tennis shoes, the provenance of those tennis shoes, if you will, is all contained in that token. The tokens associated with those shoes can then automatically, programmatically be traded or interface with a DeFi platform that provides the tokens as collateral for a capital loan that results in the ability for the manufacturer to go and do whatever it is they need to do. And then further down the supply chain, the tokens also programmatically interface with an insurance company providing product insurance. And then later, the tokens interface with, with the bank, whether it's centralized or decentralized bank, that will, when the tokens or the shoes get sold to a distributor, the tokens are transferred to the distributor, the ownership of those tokens, and the distributor returns an accounts receivable, a document that can take the form of a token, and then those AR tokens, again, automatically interface with decentralized finance to get factored and provide cash flow, open up cash flow back to the manufacturer. So the combination of these technologies is what's exciting and is what's going to change the way the economy works, and everything is going to be tokenized. Everything you see, touch, all products and services are going to have an associated token. We're going to live in a tokenized world.
Right.
And as you pointed out correctly, all the different pieces of infrastructure that are needed to realize the vision I just described are now in place. In fact, I'll go beyond that and say that we know of organizations that are building out precisely what I just described and are going to market with that.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people really understand the scale in which that impacts all things in business, especially the example you just gave with supply chain. Just the amount of cost savings alone of being able to transact, from a manufacturing point through all the way to retail or through a sales agency, all those aspects are typically tracked by a lot of man hours, and in most cases they're inaccurate, which is the biggest problem that banks have in being able to leverage capital against a lot of these large industries. You could go into pharmaceuticals, you could go into biotech, obviously you're talking about sneakers and just clothing, anything out there that is a manufacturing engine from a supply chain standpoint, much less the fact that you could really understand. I could see governments really starting to understand truly what is in the supply chain, to where you don't have guesses like what we have right now here in the United States of whether or not you're going to have enough supply chain in place to deal with the West Coast demand of whatever product out there you might need, whether it's coming from India, China, or even here in the United States being, self-made here. So having that kind of throughput analysis and being an open aspect on the blockchain, this would really start to open up a lot of efficiencies for industry, which would lower cost, possibly lower cost of goods, which could be another big thing, to the, just to the average consumer. So big moves happening in blockchain out there. And when I talk to, my partners and fellows within the industry, they understand what's happening. I just keep kind of saying, guys, I don't know that you really understand to the scale in which this is going to impact business. It's like the lights have just turned on for technology in a big way. When you think about that and you look at the right kind of partnerships, the right kind of deals, because that's going to be another big factor with blockchain companies now, because the tech is going to get somewhat comparable to what other companies are doing. Sure, there's going to be some technology advancements, but what kind of partnership deals do you think are going to be important for Hedera and also for just blockchain companies in general over the next year or two?
Well, for Hedera, what's important is that the partners that are using the technology are platforms themselves. If you want to scale on a global scale and sort of realize the vision that we're talking about, then what we want is those companies like ServiceNow that have platforms themselves and thousands of customers around the globe to take the technology, integrate it, and then make it easier for their customer base to build out solutions and go to market with their solutions, right? What we have in Hedera, you can think of as pure infrastructure. It's the plumbing at the bottom of the tech stack. And then on top of that plumbing, or the infrastructure as a service layer, it will be built out platform as a service technology, like what ServiceNow and others are doing. And then on top of that, the solutions get built by small, medium businesses and enterprises on a global scale. And so that next layer of value has to be built at the next layer, the platform as a service layer, and organizations that have the platforms, and then those are sort of aggregation points of demand for distributed ledger generally, and for us specifically. Those are the companies that I think help us scale to where we want to be.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's talk about Hashpack, crypto wallet. how all that is going to work with Hedera, because these are new evolutions that you guys are obviously in the throes of developing. How is that going to be applied into what we're seeing today?
Yeah, well, so just to be clear, Hashpack is a third-party wallet. It's not built by us. It's
Right.
built by the community. It's a great example of the kinds of things that the ecosystem can build when the layer one, when Hedera in this case doesn't try to do the same thing. And I think that's an
Mm-hmm.
important point. We want to keep Hedera and the services that it offers very thin and skinny and narrowly defined. And Hedera doesn't want to compete with the ecosystem when building out all these other pieces of infrastructure and critical components of these solutions. That's not what Hedera wants to be in. So we value partners that bring tech like Hashpack to the table. Now, Hashpack is a Chrome extension and browser-based crypto wallet that supports HBAR and our services, the Hedera token service, and it supports things like NFTs built on Hedera. You can manage your HTS assets within Hashpack. You can associate, send, receive, and admire or view your NFT collection within Hashpack. So it's a great example of, again, an organization that's built out an important piece of the ecosystem infrastructure. And there are others, right? Filecoin last year announced a grant program to partner with us to build solutions to not us directly, but to provide funding for organizations that want to build solutions that use both Filecoin and Hedera. Another example of where we're partnering with others in the ecosystem that have complementary technology. But we're happy about this, and the list of organizations going to market with these types of solutions built around us continues to grow.
I'm curious, so Google starting a blockchain division here recently, really starting to amp up their internal teams. Obviously, we know there's a partnership there with Hedera, but there wasn't necessarily a mention of Hedera. How is that connection going to work, I guess? Is this going to be something in terms of a project that is in unison, or do you see some potentials here for kind of cross use cases with Hedera and Google?
Yeah. Well, so what I can't talk about specifically is what we're doing with Google, but what I can say in general is that the nature of the relationships with the council members has evolved over time.
Right.
When we go back to February of 2019 and we added the first 5 members to the council, by and large, with one exception, that being DLA Piper, they didn't know exactly what they wanted to do with the tech. They knew that it was important. They had ideas for how they might use the tech, but they were joining Hedera because they wanted to be with us, work with us as the market matured, and they figured out what their interests are in the technology as a category. That's changed. When we add a council member today, ServiceNow being a great example, I think they're the last council member we announced. It's because we have worked with them on projects and they pretty much know exactly what they want to do. Google is sort of in the middle, right? Google joined us. I forget exactly when. I think it was early 2021, or maybe it's 2020. And the nature of that relationship and the way in which we work together has evolved over time. And I think that is reflecting the maturity in the market and in Google's thinking. But the details and specifics we can't address today.
Understand completely of how that kind of comes in. And I think a lot of people, when they're trying to map out how a project is doing, obviously they're looking at the players, they're looking at the management team, the developer team, all those kind of things, and trying to assess, just like anybody, a good stock analyst would do on, if it was a stock traded product. So those are the kind of things that we continuously dive into. Mance, when you look at, so you guys have done a lot on governance, really kind of the organization itself become even more decentralized. The organization from the governed side being, the addition of ServiceNow. And if you look at, we're showing this on screen right now, just a general of a list from your governed organizations. Some pretty big operators here. How far do you see this growing in terms of the governance organization itself?
Yeah. So by design, it's intended to grow to 39 and then stop. I mean,
Okay.
when I say stop, it's not entirely true. The council members themselves today can only stay on the council for a maximum of 6 years, 2 3-year terms. And then the intent is for the council members to rotate off. That doesn't mean that they leave the ecosystem or that the work we're doing with them necessarily stops. It just means that somebody new joins, and only the active members at the time have the opportunity to vote in the governance. So we're at 25, and we have been adding about one per month, something like that. The council is fully functional now, and it's working well. So the importance now is shifting from having enough council members to effectively govern to now having the right council members for the long term to benefit the growth of the Hedera ecosystem in general. So there's been a shift there in focus, and we have the opportunity to take our time and make sure that when we add council members, we are adding those that are going to contribute the most.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so last question for you, Mance. Lots to unpack here, I think, now from understanding of where Hedera is going. You look out into the future of blockchain here in the next 18 months or so, we think 2022 is going to be a landslide year in terms of development achievements. What are some of the big things you see from the blockchain industry that you're most interested in, both as a participant, but also as, really engaged in the development process? Where do you see this going in the next 18 months?
Well, I think that integration is going to become increasingly important. And what I mean by that is one of the reasons that we open source the software was to make it possible for those that want to build their own peer-to-peer networks to use our code base to do so. So when we finalize the open sourcing of the project, then we would anticipate everyone to go and be able to carve out their slice of cyberspace. These could be small private networks where you're inviting your friends or family or colleagues within the office to, say, work on a document together, or play a game, or to engage in some sort of market or commerce without having a third party that manages all of that. Mm-hmm. Anyone that does that uses our tech code base can simply and almost instantly integrate with Hedera as a network. Other organizations in the ecosystem, other layer ones in the ecosystem, are trying to do the same thing. Right. I think that the ability to scale Web 3.0 with thousands and thousands of peer-to-peer networks that all integrate with one another seamlessly, that can transfer value or assets between each other securely, is the next big step. We don't want to build a bunch of walled gardens. I think we made that mistake in Web 2.0, and Web 3.0 we have the opportunity to correct that mistake. And what I would anticipate, not in 18 months but over time, is that those Web 2.0 products and services like social that are walled gardens will become decentralized, and the integration that I'm talking about is going to be key to enabling that to happen.
Yeah, I think you just hit it on the head of the reason to open source, because you are exactly right. If you look, I grew up in Silicon Valley and in the tech startup, worked with Microsoft in the era in which all this stuff was being built. And you're right, this was one of the fatal flaws of Web 2.0, still is today, is the walled gardens do exist. The potential, though, for federated, decentralized platforms out there has been the big challenge, I guess, has been able to plug into a code base or an ecosystem in which you could let something like that flourish. And it just never occurred. Everybody kind of locked and loaded. It started with AOL and it just kept going. And now, we have Facebook, which is the same kind of scenario. And all of those kind of things are applicable. But I think you're right. The interesting thing, though, was the internet when it was first created by Tim Berners-Lee, when HTTP was first really launched. The evolution and the idea was what you're talking about, was full, free-flowing, decentralized, basically open information. That happening in Web3 now, though, with blockchain as its backbone, I think is a completely different animal, which really is going to be interesting to watch as we see all of this to develop out there. So I think you guys are definitely on it for sure. I'm really intrigued with the aspect of the open source. If a developer wanted to jump in and grab the code, start developing, what are the steps they would have to take to plug into the Hedera network?
Well, we have something called state proofs, and version 1 is already out there. Version 2 will improve it in various ways. But basically, a state proof simply makes it possible for somebody querying the network to ask for proof that something has happened, like Alice pays Bob an HBAR or passes them a token or something. The network as a whole can provide a proof to a third party that transaction has actually occurred. And that's new. It's not done that way in the market today. It's a lot more complicated to do that in the market today. But with the creation and use of state proofs, it makes it possible for these different independent networks to exchange information with one another that they can trust because the network as a whole has made the assertion that the information is true. So insofar as you trust the network, the participants in the network, that is, then you can trust the information coming from the network. That's what we offer as part of the code base. And for developers, there will be an API there that makes it easy for them to go and take advantage of that.
Very cool. All right, you guys, you have to go over and check Hedera's website out because they really kind of break it down in a full array of how all of this is coming together. So congrats to what you guys have done this year. Big achievements, Mance. I can't wait to see how all this starts to roll out for you guys. So thank you so much for stopping in on the show today. We appreciate it.
Okay, great. Thank you for your interest.
Excellent. All right, so you guys are tuned in over on the podcast right now. Thank you so much. Make sure to leave some stars over there if you're checking us out on Spotify or iTunes. It's one of the best places, but there is a better place, and that is right here on YouTube. Jump over here, just search Paul Barron Network. You'll find us right there, and you can, of course, subscribe, like a few videos out there of the ones you want to learn about. Maybe you're interested in projects, learning about blockchain, all those kind of tech advancements, or maybe you're looking into the technical analysis and our sentiment data that we publish on an ongoing basis. Just make sure and hit the diamond circle below to join our private member group. It's really easy. And of course, if you want to reach me, it's out on Twitter. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.